FutureDad 58. Climate change is not even wrong. Quote, "That's what's boiling the oceans." End quote. Al Gore. Science is hard. The general public typically stops learning it at the age of 15, when it begins to resemble Greek. Literally in the case of physics. The ones who didn't stop, the science nerds, were made the butt of jokes, but it's widely accepted that, as adults, they know their stuff. They've done their homework. So, it is an act of respect and trust that when science says something, the public dutifully nods its head. Lately, however, that respect and that trust has been stretched to its limits. Nowadays, the reference for science, and especially scientists, is on shaky ground. Trust. How did we get here? Well, science and the trust placed upon it has been wantonly undermined in recent years by the likes of Anthony Fauci, Michael Mann and others, who've used it as a battering ram to force adherence and get what they want. This, in effect, stolen valour has done incalculable damage to science's reputation as a robust way of explaining the world. This has gotten so bad across all scientific disciplines, in fact, that a replication crisis has emerged. As succinctly stated by Belgian psychologist Matthias Desmet, quote, "Most published findings are wrong or unreproducible," end quote. Another article called a, quote, "inability to reproduce," end quote, spells it out. Quote, "A simple but disturbing fact is at the centre of this problem. Researchers are increasingly starting with no hypothesis and then searching, some might say grasping, for meaningful correlations in data," end quote. As a result, after repeated attempts to gaslight them about phenomena staring them in the face, the general public are turning away from the expert class. Therefore, to commence on a note of clarity before I shine a spotlight on the climate change industry, I will summarise what science is and by implication what science is not. The scientific method. Science is a systematic integration of knowledge attained through the scientific method. It is a process that can be described in the following way. A hypothesis about nature is conceived. The hypothesis is stated such that it can be tested by repeatable experiments. If it is validated experimentally, within the margin of error, it is then expressed as a prediction. If repeat predictions are successful, and the technology permits it, the measurement is refined to become more precise and accurate, two different things, until it becomes an established theory, a statement of how nature works. Important, if the predictions are unsuccessful, we unapologetically throw the science out as wrong. Then we either modify the formula or devise an alternative explanation for the phenomena, or both. These steps are a journey whereby we intend to progressively decrease how wrong we are in our understanding of nature. The last point is crucial because it declares an important truth, that we can never be absolutely right about nature, just less wrong. This applies even to basic everyday science. Gravity. Take gravity. The first fundamental force that was discovered and is experienced every day by everyone who's ever lived. It has been tested to several decimal places of precision and predicts physical motion to several decimal places of accuracy. However, there is nothing to preclude a hidden variable that we haven't yet seen, lurking in the formula which describes gravity. Indeed, we still don't understand if all the matter in the universe is enough to make the universe stop expanding one day and then gravitationally collapse. Uncertainty. So even although we are less wrong about gravity now than we were in the 17th century when the apple famously fell on Newton's head, we cannot, with 100% confidence, say we know everything about it. That is not science's weakness, it is science's strength. Give me conservative uncertainty over assertive certainty any day of the week. With that in mind, we turn to climate science. Let's start with a basic need-to-know question. Is it genuine science? Well, if we go back to a description of science, specifically the scientific method, notice that it relies on three important elements we can bring to bear: experimental control, predictive power, and falsifiability. 1. Experimental control. The experimental method is fascinating. My high school physics project involved using lasers and a very sensitive pendulum to validate the gravitational constant, big G. The experiment was designed to reduce the number of input variables to 1 and the output measurements to 1 to isolate the effect I wanted to measure. I didn't try to infer big G by throwing a tennis ball outside, hoping there was no wind, trusting that the Earth's mass is fixed, and measuring its flight time with fingers and thumb. You could attempt that, but the results would be so error-prone as to be unusable. Big G. Now, control has an unpleasant reputation these days. Everyone from communists to, other communists try to control your behaviour. But control in experimentation is a great thing. It means I am systematically changing one thing in my experiment whilst holding everything else constant. And it means I can say with confidence that big G equals 6.675 plus or minus 0.005 units. That is only because I am controlling the other variables, so they cannot mistakenly influence results such that big G equals 7.2. I labour this point because if we are paying attention, we see an immediate problem with the science of climate change. There is no control. Nothing can conceivably be kept constant in such grandiose circumstances. The idea of holding the world still whilst you dial up the carbon dioxide, take a temperature reading, then dial it up a notch, then take another reading and so on is preposterous. So the good folks behind climate change predictions do something else. Models. They instead have devised ever more elaborate computer models to fit their currently known variables. Hiding details of the many-body physics of all the world's variables in the basement, they tune the output until it is a reasonably frightening temperature rise. This distortion of science is exactly why it is not to be trusted and why it is mocked by hard science practitioners. For illustration, let's compare climate change to quantum electrodynamics. It's an unfair fight. I include it here for contrast. QED has been validated by experiment and prediction to 12 digits of precision, the most precise in the whole of science. Contrast that to climatologists who, on a regular basis, bring new, varied temperature forecasts even when it's to 1 decimal place. When it is later shown to be incorrect, it is subsequently discarded and the discussion memory hold. Global average. They carry on. Sometimes the latest study, read computer model, will include more rapid cloud formation inputs. Sometimes it excludes volcanoes. These models will tell them, and the modelers will tell everyone, that the global average temperature, let's pretend such a thing exists, will rise by 0.5 C by 2050. Definitely by 2075. Actually also up by 1.5 C by 2100. Any round number uncertainty here isn't academic modesty in the great tradition. Because without blushing, different teams marching down the hill with expensive laptops, i.e. tablets, will announce any or all estimates as facts. It's happening, it just hasn't happened yet. You're a climate denier if you voice any skepticism. They stop short for now of using the word heretic. Polemic. And with that salting of the earth of any possible dialogue done, they can begin the polemic, the manufacturing of consent. That's the reason why you suddenly must be frightened of weather, stop buying cars and start eating bugs. From Fox Business in July 2025. This is an actual headline. This brings me to the second problem. Predictive power. 2. Predictive power. I list here various different climate predictions collected by the diligent Tony Heller at Real Climate Science, inflicted on the public across the decades. It's important to keep these prominent and not let them gather dust, because they form part of the never-ending job of keeping the climate change guessers honest. 1971, Washington Post, new ice age coming. 1974, The Guardian, new ice age coming fast. 1974, Time, another ice age. 1976, New York Times Book Review, The Cooling. 1978, Associated Press, no end in sight to 30-year cooling trend. Then, intriguingly, it changes in tone to that of warming and ice melting. 1988, Lansing State Journal, oceans to rise from 1 to 6 feet. 1988, the Canberra Times, Maldives threatening to be completely covered in 30 years. 1989, Associated Press, rising seas could obliterate nations by 2000. 1989, Salon, New York City West Side highways underwater by 2019. 2000, The Independent, children won't know what snow is. 2002, The Guardian, famine in 10 years unless the rich give up meat, fish and dairy. 2004, The Guardian, Britain will be Siberian in less than 20 years. 2008, Associated Press, in 5 to 10 years, the Arctic will be free of sea ice in the summer. 2008, WUWT, the entire North polarized cap will disappear in 5 years. 2009, The Independent, we have fewer than 50 days to save our planet from catastrophe. 2013, The Guardian, US Navy predicts summer ice-free Arctic by 2016. 2014, Washington Examiner, only 500 days remain to avoid climate chaos. And many such predictions continue on. I add 3 pertaining to the future at the time of writing. We won't see these ones fail until a few years from now. 2021, Mirror. Parts of North Wales and eastern England are likely to be underwater by 2050. 2022, NASA. Parts of the world will be uninhabitable by 2050 due to climate change. 2023, WEF. Arctic Ocean could become ice-free by 2030. Now, it's worth pausing a moment at the hubris of this. If astrophysicists were to periodically tell us that a giant comet is going to hit us in 1983, 1990, 1996, no, my mistake, 2001, and so on, and so on, and so on, would we still give them $1 in funding? Far less platform them to a global audience, reformat whole industries on their say-so, and impoverish the world to placate their shrill, emotional pleading? Language. It's not only scientific credibility and trust that's been abused. Notice the language has changed with their predictions over time. The last ones uses could and likely as hedging language. For prediction, these are interesting modifiers. Without further information on probability, it transforms the prediction from something into nothing. If I told you flatly that your house could burn to the ground, you would rightly say, yeah, I guess it could. Anything's possible. What's your point? Are you trying to sell me home insurance? For climate science prediction, the key advantage of could or likely is that if it doesn't happen, the prediction will be hand-waved away because could or likely was used. If the prediction comes true, it will be yelled from the rooftops that we were all warned about this, followed rapidly by, I need $20 million to investigate this further. Of course, it won't come true. See the predictions above. But that's not the point. The power and funding gained by narrative control and policy formation derived from fear is the point. We're all forced to buy the home insurance, as it were, whether we want to or not. 3. Falsification. I said in the beginning that if the predictions are wrong, then we throw the science out because it is junk. So we must promptly do that. The entire climate change industry, forecasting, pressure groups, analytics, publications, policy departments, the whole enchilada is fake, not to be trusted. Not science, fear porn. And that's not all. We can go beyond the prediction problem and say, if there's no degree of wrongness, which provides a route to the claims being considered false, i.e. it is unfalsifiable, then it is even further removed from being science at all. It should instead be bracketed alongside other claims with similar smoke-like solidity, such as the existence of the Kraken, and that Queen Elizabeth was a man. These belong in the same category. They too are without rigorous, overwhelming evidence, and they too are unfalsifiable. Magician. Since there is not a day that a well-paid climate change cleric will say, look, we got the last prediction wrong about Londoners having to use pedalos to get to work in 2025, and the previous 93 predictions before that. So hands up, it's all nonsense. Richly rewarded nonsense, I may add, so ignore us for now. We'll get back to you when we have something more concrete. That will never happen. So we must put them out their misery and ours and pre-ignore them. Why pre-ignore? Why so harsh? After all, there are myriad very clever, highly paid and highly clever climatologists wandering the Arctic, collecting ice and sifting through data which suggests that the temperature and carbon dioxide level in the pre-Holocene period means Wales will be underwater by 2065. Did I mention they are also very clever? And like many sheep in Wales, you'll be encouraged to walk en masse in a different direction than you wanted, more slowly than you wanted, for your own safety and that of the planet. When Wales is stubbornly not underwater by then, what will we do? We'll all just move on as the sheep do, to end up distracted and alarmed by some other prediction over there on the other side of the field. Nonsense. If this climate chicanery is starting to sound like nonsense, it's because it is. The claims are repeatedly wrong and unfalsifiable, so following the principles of the scientific process, it must be thrown out as not fit for purpose. The researchers themselves must cease the alarmism until it is science, at least until it can be used in a more constrained way to better our understanding, not parcelled and propagandised so the beautiful rolling landscape of Dumfries and Galloway in Scotland can be carpet-bombed with steel monstrosities of a similar size and threat level of the War of the Worlds tripods. Consensus fallacy. But repeated failure doesn't stop them. Other non-scientific methods have been cooked up in order to maintain the veneer of credibility. I present to you the magic of consensus. It has been oft cited for decades that 97% of scientists agree that there is man-made global warming. Whoops, I meant climate change. Widespread climate disruption. Eventually, if you don't agree, climate Armageddon. Anyway, unfortunately for them, consensus isn't science either. That's not how science works. If there was a paper that showed that within the bounds of error, X was occurring, and principally because of that, Y would happen a decade later, as has previously been accurately predicted, then yes, we should take it seriously. But whether 3 scientists agree with it or 300, the hypothesis either stands on its own as being experimentally repeatable, predictive and falsifiable, or it doesn't. But there isn't such a paper. So there is nothing to discuss. Sometimes they even tell in themselves as to the true purpose of it all. Mask off. Former US Senator Timothy Wirth, representing the Clinton-Gore administration as US Under-Secretary of State, addressed the Rio Climate Summit audience. Quote, "We have got to ride the global warming issue. Even if the theory of global warming is wrong, we will be doing the right thing in terms of economic policy and environmental policy." End quote. In 1988, former Canadian Minister of the Environment told editors and reporters of the Calgary Herald, quote, "No matter if the science of global warming is all phony, climate change provides the greatest opportunity to bring about justice and equality in the world." End quote. IPCC official Ottmar Edenhofer, speaking in November 2010, advised that, quote, "One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. Instead, Climate change policy is about how we redistribute de facto the world's wealth. End quote. It tells us straight in our face the true origins of the climate change cult. It is about redistribution. It is egalitarianism. It is simply communism. Now, astute listeners will have noticed by now that I haven't gone into the meat of the climate debate. I haven't gone into the climate change claims. I haven't challenged the hockey stick chart. Which came first, the carbon or the warming? I haven't asked, if human-generated carbon dioxide drives climate, why does nature-generated carbon dioxide, for example volcanoes, matter less? I haven't even bothered to debate if the warming is good for the earth or not. It would be. That is not the intent here, nor is it relevant. I only need to know that their black box modelling methods are not science and their climate predictions are incorrect enough to dismiss it out of hand. In short, there is a track record of unsuccessful climate change predictions, therefore no discussion is necessary. Besides, the rigorous homework marking and diligent fact-checking don't work. It doesn't make them stop. It doesn't convert what they're doing into science. I have read email chains 1,000 fathoms deep about the questionable data and lavish interpretations. But we're no further forward. Why? Because attention itself is a form of compliance. Does point-by-point refuting a shouty ex-girlfriend with bulging eyes make her leave you alone? And there are mortgages to pay. There are conferences in exotic locations to attend and chide the proletariat about their foreign holidays. No obvious brown envelopes stuffed with cash are needed, thanks. Stable careers and regular stipends are quite enough. That is why Professor John Ioannidis of Stanford said, "The greater the financial and other interests and prejudices in the scientific field, the less likely This is why Professor John Ioannidis of Stanford said, quote, "The greater the financial and other interests and prejudices in a scientific field, the less likely the research findings are to be true." End quote. And it was with a weary resignation that we realised scientists can be bought just as easily as anyone else, perhaps even more so. Conclusion. So to conclude, climate change is not science, it is pseudoscience, it is a cult. Its predictions are wrong with stunning regularity. It is unfalsifiable. The motivations behind it are often corrupt. The loudest advocates do not course correct. It is for those reasons, as per the title, that it is not even wrong. That is a special phrase we apply to something not validatable by the scientific method, and whose predictive power is absent, and ideas unfalsifiable. It has not satisfied the most basic requirement of science, and there's nothing we can say or show to disprove it, by design. And if we persist in even referring to this junk science, when there is no means or appetite to prove it wrong, then we are to blame. Action. There is nothing more to say, but there is a lot more to do. End net zero. Cancel the climate grift. Shutter the government departments. Defund the supranational alphabet agencies enforcing it. Mute the climate clerics who see climate change in every cloud, whilst ignoring cloud in our models, until they employ the colossal craniums in actually doing science. I've even made it into a ditty in case you forget. Don't make it a chore, just pre-ignore. If you prefer something less silly and more sombre, I'll end with this. The world's brainpower and treasure must dedicate itself to much less wasteful projects and much more genuine dangers than one which is, metaphorically speaking, only hot air. FutureDad.